So the topic for today is
Mhm.
conflict.
Yes.
I'm interested into why you want to do it. So I'm guessing this is something that you have some experiences in. I'm curious about it because I'm not sure what's going to come off me. I think
Huh.
my lack of conflict was my issue.
Oh, your conflict
I think,
avoidance.
yeah, I think my lack of my not being able to speak and not being able to fight back, so to speak. I think that was a problem.
And that linked to
So
your
bin-
eating behaviors.
binge eating, restrictive eating, and body
Mhm.
image issues. But what made you think of this topic?
So what made me think of this topic is because of my relationship with conflict in the past and how I grew up viewing conflict, and it was a big trigger for me in terms of binge eating, basically. And I didn't know how to handle conflict very well when I was younger. So yeah, I think it'll be really interesting because I'm curious to hear about what conflict meant for you and then why you were so avoidant of it, I suppose, because we might have different angles here. So when I was thinking of this episode, anyway, I was thinking of like, first of all, like, what is conflict? Like, how would you describe conflict basically as a starting place? What would you say? Or do you want to Google it?
Well,
Shall we Google a definition?
we can, yeah, because I think we're all going to have our own ideas of it. Like when I think of conflict, I think loud, raised voices, if not screaming, falling out, and it feels like a divide with two people. That's what I think of when I think of conflict.
Yeah.
Conf-
And
conf-
I'm guessing based on what you're saying there that you view it as like a negative connotation for you.
yes.
Yeah. So for me, it also has a negative connotation too.
Hmm.
But if I Google it, let's see what it says if I Google it. It says to be incompatible or at variance, to clash. And then it does say a serious disagreement or argument, especially a protracted one, whatever protracted means. Yeah.
See, it's interesting to me that the word incompatible came up first because that to me feels like how I view conflict and it feels quite definitive.
Mm.
Because, like,
Mhm.
something I've had to learn being in relationships is you can have disagreements, you can have falling out. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need to break up with someone or you need to not speak to
Yeah.
someone. It's more about how you navigate those disagreements and also how you repair afterwards. But
Yeah.
there is very much a part of my brain that's like, if you're in conflict, then that you shouldn't be talking to that person or that's not someone that you should be around, sort of
Mhm.
thing. It really holds quite a negative connotation for me.
Yeah. It used to hold a really strong negative connotation for me as well. And actually, looking at the definition here, some of the synonyms for it, one of the cinnamon, we're not talking about cinnamon buns today.
Yeah, that was a few episodes ago.
One of the synonyms that comes up is war. So I think that
Mm.
that's quite telling, really, isn't it? Um,
Yeah.
for me, so why I thought it was interesting to think like what is conflict and what is our connotation with it, and I guess like I went back to my childhood and thinking like, what did conflict like? How was it handled in my childhood home, basically?
Mhm.
Um, and it wasn't handled very well. Basically, anything in my childhood home that was like a difference of opinion or a difference in like interests or desires or wants or needs or ways of doing things, that was viewed as conflict. And that doesn't necessarily need to be conflict because you can have a different perspective on something or a different interest. And that can be approached from quite a healthy perspective of like learning about each other. And I think that's kind of where I land now and try to approach conflict from that lens now. But that wasn't kind of what I was raised to do around
Mhm.
conflict. That's something I very much had to learn in my adult life. So when there was a difference growing up, the way it was handled, because it was seen as like a negative thing to have that difference between two people, it was arguments. It was like it was navigated as if one person is right and the other person is wrong. And there always had to be a right person and a wrong person.
Mhm.
And typically because I was the child, I was usually the wrong person. Right. Yeah. Um,
Mhm.
then it would become this battle of like the argument would become a battle of each person trying to prove themselves and prove that they are the one who is right. And within that kind of the difference, I think the way I understand this is the reason it was one person is right and one person is wrong is because a difference in opinion a way of doing something was seen as a personal attack on the other,
Mhm.
on the,
Yeah.
so one example that comes to my mind quite a bit, and I think it's interesting to talk about it here because obviously we're trying this conflict into our relationship with food, is like at the dinner table. I remember as a child, like if I didn't like the food that I was being given or didn't want to finish the food that I'd been given, then that would become a really strong conflict at the dinner table. And I remember like some of my like elders would be saying like how ungrateful I was or, you know, how terrible of a parent they are because I didn't like their food. So that's where like personal dynamic comes into it. It's not that, well, I just don't like this food and you do like this food and you cooked it. It's like, I cooked this food and the fact that you don't want to eat it or you don't like this food is a personal attack on me because I
Mhm.
prepared it, you know?
Yes. Yes.
So it was, that's how it was, that's how it was navigated. And I think, I don't know if you relate to that experience of conflict in your home at all.
No. Actually, not at all. I grew up in silence.
Mhm.
I remember my mother telling me when we were teenagers, like she grew up with my granddad he suffered with issues with alcohol, and so he would be very loud and he'd be very angry, and so she grew up in a very chaotic home with
Mhm.
shouting, and she hated that, and she swore that she would never shout at us. So she never raised her voice. My mother, I've never heard my mother raise her voice at us. She did the opposite with my dad in that she wouldn't speak up,
Mhm.
which I took on as well. I'm exactly the same. I'll keep everything inside. Keep everything inside. Unless you're watching this on YouTube, you're not going to see me pushing down with my hands. But that's how I've always described binging. Like it's pushing it down. I push everything down. We stay quiet. So I adopted the same pattern as she did. But looking back, we could feel it. We could
Mhm.
sense that there was friction. We could sense that they weren't getting along. We could sense that something was happening.
Mhm.
Um, well, you pick up on that. You pick up on the energy of someone. And I find myself very aware of it now. Like with
Mhm.
Stuart, he can walk into a room and I'm like, something's wrong. Something's off with you. What's off with you?
Mhm.
I think as a result of that environment, the only way I could kind of figure out if something was wrong with someone is picking up on their energy because no one was saying anything. No one
Yeah.
would talk about it. So my mum took one extreme, bless her, and did the absolute opposite.
Mhm.
And I always wonder, like, there's a middle ground somewhere. Like,
Mhm.
because even now, my first instinct, if something upset me, if something's bothered me, anything like that, my first instinct is to just swallow it and keep it down. It has to be a real conscious effort, and I have to rehearse in my head and make notes on my phone if I'm going to approach someone and say, this upset me or this bothered me. And I have to be really careful to not be like, please don't be upset. I'm
Mhm.
really sorry I've hurt your feelings. I really love you. I really care for you. Da, 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 da. I'm working on just saying you did this and it upset me. So
Yeah.
my environment was, I don't want it to sound like I'm like bad talking my parents' parenting because I personally
Mhm.
have 4 children. No, thank you. And no one's perfect. But I think my mom would look back on my childhood and think, there was never any conflict, there was never any fighting, there was never any shouting, like, what's the complaints? Whereas to
Mhm.
me, I was like, but we could feel it. We knew there was something in the energy and no one was talking about it. So then we had to either guess that something was going on or think that we had done something wrong.
Mm,
And then the blame would
yeah,
go on us of like, well, maybe I did this and that's why she's clearly
yeah.
stressed or she's upset. Like that, you leave us in a position of having to fill in the blanks.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think what you're talking about speaks to that, like that hyper vigilance that can come in
mhm,
when you're in an environment where the things aren't spoken about openly, or there is tension and conflict, and you're not quite sure why. There's uncertainty around it as well,
yeah,
and you've been kind of taught to the approach to that is to kind of not face it head on, but to just like you say, to swallow it, to push it
hmm,
down. That energy still has to go somewhere. And to you, it kind of went into a place of hypervigilance, like checking everyone, making sure everyone's okay, that
yes,
kind of thing.
yeah,
Mhm,
yeah. Watching it play out in my relationship
mhm,
now. I'm curious then with the way that I relate it to me, like what are you like in conflict? What were you like in conflict
mhm. Yeah.
versus probably as you are now? I imagine you're probably different in conflict, but how did that look like for you as you was navigating relationships?
I was thinking this because it's really interesting that you said for you, the conflict ties to the binging because the binging was that like swallowing it all. It was like
Hmm.
pushing it all down. It was suppressing it. And I view my binging connected to conflict, but in the opposite way. I almost see it as like the binging is that voice that comes out that's like fiery and feisty, and it's not gonna be quiet. Kind of like that conflict between the restriction and the binging. I see the restriction as the suppressing, the pushing down, the making small, and the binging like, no, we're not gonna do that. We're gonna stick up for ourselves. We're gonna make sure we're heard. And I to go back to like conflict in my home growing up. So I've obviously described how it was viewed and how it was navigated. And this was not so much with my mum. This was more with my dad, this relationship. I remember my mum being more of a peacemaker and she didn't get too involved in arguments. But in the home between me and my dad and more my dad's side of the family, I had a lot of conflict because I would speak up, I would fight back, I would be quite argumentative. So I would get pulled into dynamic. And I don't think that was received very well. And again, this is no one's fault. We're talking like kind of about culture and how generations viewed certain like family members' roles and parenting. So I don't think my kind of the dynamic I'm describing is particularly unique, or I think it is a product of that time, if you know what I mean. So I can see in my dad's side of the family, it was very much like the father is the head of the home. Like my granddad was, his voice was the key voice, and what he said went. And when he got back from work, my dad had to be really quiet and had to go to a separate room. And, it was all very like, you, as a child, you just did what you were told and you didn't respond back to that. So then when my dad became the father and I did speak back or would say, like, would refuse to eat something or would refuse to do something, or would say, like, my opinion on something that was different. I think that was really challenging for him because he wasn't raised in a family where that was a dynamic of what a child should do to a father, and especially not a female as well, because female dynamic of like my gran was very much there. Her life was to just serve my granddad kind of thing. My older brother is probably more would have been more like you, like conflict avoidant.
Mm.
And then I came along and was a girl and was the opposite, the complete opposite of my brother, where I would fight back, I would argue, I would raise my voice and shout. And that was, I think, really jarring for my dad because then his voice would raise and we would just get into this battle with each other. That's how it would be, basically. But there was also a lot of like within that, I can see how shame came into it as a parenting tactic. And I think I spoke about this a while ago on the podcast of like shame was used as a behavioral management tactic kind of thing. So, for example, to go back to that example of being at home and not wanting to eat a certain meal, like we would get told things like, oh, think about all the children in these countries that don't have any food at all, and you're turning down this food, or you won't finish
Mhm.
your meal, or we'd be forced to stay at the table until we had finished a meal. So it was quite, that was quite shaming. It was quite forceful parenting tactic. It was not none of this gentle parenting that you hear people talk about now, in kind of asking a child, like, well, to try and understand why they don't want something, or why they have that opinion, or why they maybe don't want to finish the meal. Like, are they full? So I guess, coming back to this example of around the table, I can see how this dynamic around conflict and food, especially at the dinner table, did tie into my eating disorder, because I guess telling a child that they aren't full and that they need to finish their meal is one, like, overriding that child's natural intuitive signals that they have in their body. Is teaching them not to trust their own body. The idea of, like, shame being used in that environment as well is making the connection between food and shame. Also, there's this dynamic of, like, saying no to food. That's a problematic thing. That's not just a neutral decision to say no to food. It's got some kind of weight behind it. And I think this whole, for me, the way I see this whole dynamic around the way conflict and difference was handled is very, very activating for the nervous system. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about with that hypervigilance. It's your nervous system's really activated. But conflict like that, for me, was just read as like a danger. Like, your system receives conflict in that kind of, navigated in that kind of way, as danger, as a threat, psychological threat, or even sometimes a physical threat, like, because smacking was a thing in my home. And all of that, if that conflict then gets coupled up with food and danger comes into the mix, it's a really tricky dynamic. And and anyone who's been in that environment, I'm like, I'm not surprised that you may have a strange relationship with food, if that's kind of how it was navigated when you were younger. Does any of that make sense? What I just
Yeah,
said.
it makes complete sense, and I
Mm,
find it fascinating how there's symmetry in both our stories,
mhm,
by way that you were speaking up, you were fighting back, so to speak, weren't you? You were partaking in conflict, you weren't
mhm.
backing down. And your binging sounds like it was like an amplification of that.
Yeah. I can see. So when this dynamic was happening when I was younger, so around, like, conflict at the dinner table, I didn't binge then because I was very young.
Yeah.
However, binging came in for me as I got older and I became a teenager. When there was conflict, I navigated conflict. Then I turned to binging. And
In place of conflict.
so I would still respond to conflict in the same way,
Mhm.
but afterwards I would binge. So I think it was almost like, because conflict was viewed as such a threat to the nervous system, I would engage in the conflict and it would become like a battle. That after the conflict had happened, I needed to regulate that. I needed to soothe that nervous system and bring it away from the fight or flight back into rest and digest. And food became a tool to be able to do that. That's how I see it.
So conflict for you, it activates that fight or flight energy, you would say?
Yes. Yeah, yeah. That's
Yes.
what it
Yeah.
does for me.
Yes.
Mhm.
Freeze is mine.
It
Total
it
freeze.
For me, it would activate the fight response in me, and for you, freeze. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
So would binging then be part of that freeze response, like that immobilization through binging?
Yes. Yes. Because I would say that, like, if there was what I thought to be conflict rising, or even because conflict's quite a strong word, even if I felt like there was a chance I was going to fall out with someone or upset someone or say something that someone wasn't going to like, I knew exactly what I wanted to say. I could identify how I felt and I could formulate how I wanted to relay it. But because I quite physically could not say the words and could not have conversations, and if I said something and then someone, like, came back with quite a snappy or a snarky response,
Mhm.
freeze. I literally would
Mhm.
not be able to say anything. I could think it, I knew exactly what I
Mhm.
should say, but I could never say it. So then I felt like food was, then after the fact, I would say I was like bombarded with, you should have said this and you should have done this and you could have done this and then you should have said this and sort of ruminating over it. And so then I think food would come in to try and push that back down again, to try and
So
like
like,
calm the brain. We're overthinking, we're spiraling, there's catastrophizing, we're all over the place. And also angry. I'd feel really angry and I don't like feeling angry. Not so much now, but I used to have this real fear that like I would get so angry that I would just scream and I would never be able to come back to normal
mm,
afterwards. It would be like all the years of all the times I felt angry and I've never been able to say it. And I would become this person I'd never be able to come back to who I am now, which sounds quite extreme when I say it like that. But I guess I didn't grow up with anger. So it's not an emotion
mhm,
that I know how to deal with or I've seen people deal with.
yeah,
So yeah, I think that all of that kind of that angst, there was that part of me
yeah,
that did want to speak up and say, don't say this or I don't like this, da, da, da. And instead of being able to say it, I,
mm,
the food was just like, well, let's just push this down. Let's try and numb this. Let's not think about it. Everything's fine. It's fine. It doesn't hurt your feelings. Get over it, kind of thing.
yeah, yeah. Got you. I don't think that sounds stupid at all. I think a lot of people can probably relate to that feeling. I've had that feeling before, not with anger, but with grief, feeling like I can't. The idea is actually feeling this grief feels so scary because I might not survive it.
Mm,
Basically, it will never end. The pain
yes.
that will feel will never end. And I think especially if you have suppressed something. So if you've had anger, but you've actually suppressed it and pushed it down, you're going to feel that even more, aren't you? Because there's more of it to potentially resurface. Um,
Yes.
but it's interesting because I actually feel like it sounds like we used binging in a very, very similar way. The only difference is actually the way we respond, the way our nervous system responds. Like mine responds to conflict through the fight, whereas yours responds through the freeze. However, the food still comes in the same way because, but in both of them, our nervous systems are very like activated. They're in an activated state of there is danger here. So there's a lots of kind of hormonally, there's lots of things going on. And I think you feel that like energetically, like you said, that angsty feeling of anger. Like I would feel like after I'd had conflict and I'd been really argumentative, even if that had ended, that would still be just like in my system. I could feel it like running through my body. Like, where does this energy go? We haven't like resolved that conflict. All we've done is just like scream at each other. And this needs to come down because this is not an energy level that I can sustain. It needs to come back down. And the food would come in to bring that down. Whereas it sounds like for you, it was maybe mine feels like it was more bodily, whereas yours
Hmm.
sounds more mental with you saying all of these thoughts were flying around and you needed to quieten that, whereas mine was physically, I just needed something to stop that energy running through my body in that way.
Yes, because the way you speak about it like that, I would also direct this energy to my body.
Mm,
So that was
okay.
when the language I would use about my body was quite extreme, and I would be like, "Oh, I'm disgusting. What is wrong with me?" And I would pick my body apart, and I think I directed the anger to my body because I think that's the thing. When I look back, I've had all these built up emotions from all the times where I stayed quiet and I didn't want to stay quiet. And I think, as you say, like it has to go somewhere. This energy can only sit in our systems for so long. It has to go somewhere. And I think that's also where, like, I made my body the issue. I directed it all to
Mm,
my body. And my body is a problem. And I would put my frustration to my body and I would pick it apart and I can picture myself now feeling this frustration of not being able to speak up and feeling the way I was feeling and like writing in my diary horrible things about my body and I need to do this and I need to change this because I can't live like this. My
mm,
body, I think, became I don't know if I'd say it was a buffer between me, but it was more like it became the target for me really as a place where I could put all of how I was feeling and all the
Mm,
frustration because holding that kind of angst, like and not being able to express it, quite
mhm,
literally would make me feel like I could jump out of my own skin, you know?
mhm.
And especially when you're in certain situations where you quite literally can't do an awful lot. And, you know, in my teens and stuff, totally unfamiliar with anything to do with nervous system regulation. And so, like, where do I put it? My body. It gives me that false sense of autonomy and like I can control this and I can manipulate this. And then maybe I don't need to think about the thoughts that I'm thinking. And this can just distract me and I don't need to think about all the other things I'm thinking about.
Two things I heard in that is there's the one thing is, like you say, the distraction. Okay, so instead of thinking about all of this to do with the conflict, I can think about my body. It's a good distraction. But also, you said that you didn't feel able to say like things to other people. You know, if you had a difference of opinion or whatever, you couldn't voice that. But it sounds like you were very able to voice to yourself, like things about your body, like, oh, you're disgusting, you need to change. It's almost as if, well, actually, if I can't say it outwardly to other people, I'll just redirect onto my body. I'll get into conflict with my body instead because I can do that. Like that feels safe enough to do. Right.
Yeah. And it feels like I might win that.
Mm. Mhm.
I may come out on top in that.
Yeah. What I think is quite interesting is like we've been talking about like interpersonal conflict here, but there is also the internal conflict within the binge restrict cycle of like the part that wants to restrict, and for whatever reason that is, that'll be unique to each individual, and then the part that wants to binge, and that kind of tension and conflict that's between the two of them, how they're kind of both battling, aren't they? And the reason I think this is relevant is if you've grown up with conflict being seen as like a dangerous or a threatening thing in your home, and if you haven't learned that or been taught that skill that two things can coexist at the same time between two people, like I can think this and you can think that, and that's okay. Or even you can be two emotions at the same time. Like another thing I remember growing up is like if if I said I felt upset about something, if that would not be allowed. It would be like, "No, no, you're not upset. Come on, you feel like this is all right." It's like there wasn't much room for that, for emotional expression either. So again, if you've grown up in that environment where that's you're kind of not allowed to have different emotions, it always has to be quote unquote positive emotions. Then when you get to the point where, you know, you're in a binge restrict cycle and you are having conflicting feelings and conflicting thoughts, that's really, really difficult. That's really hard. That it's going to feel like almost your nervous system is going to read it the same way. It's going to read that as like dangerous or threatening because everywhere else in your life, you've been taught that conflict, whatever it looks like, is a negative thing. So when you experience it internally as well, it's going to be hard to handle.
Yeah,
You're
I'm
going to
really
want to
glad
shut
you've
it
said,
down.
yeah, yeah, I'm really glad you've raised that because that really lands for me when I think about that consistent conflict of being in the binge restrict cycle
Hmm.
to the point where I think, you know, prior to recovery, I just reached despair in the end because you're fighting these two parts of yourself and it is exhausting. I'm thinking as well, I always felt the restrictive part of me was the real part of me. That was
I
like,
always thought the other way around, like the
did
binging was the
you?
real part of me. Yeah.
Just, I mean, I should have guessed that we'd be the opposite. I always thought that because I thought that the restrictive part of me was the real me, and then the binging me was this angry, kind of aggressive person that had no self control, any sort of negative emotions, anything that wasn't like cool, calm, collected was negative to me. And I think that is just a lot of that is just from growing up and not being around that, not seeing displays of anything other than everything's fine. Like, even though, as I say, definitely wasn't, everything surface level is fine. That anytime I felt anything that was a bit more heightened than that, that I associated with this binge part of me, and I think that's why a lot of my binging felt quite frantic, because I think they were anger fueled and I think they were shame fueled, and I think that because anything that was angry or anything that was negative didn't feel safe to experience, I think that was also attached to the binging. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, yeah, it does.
So hard to
And I think
articulate sometimes.
no, but I do relate to what you're saying, even though I say I view the binging as more like more the authentic part of
Mhm,
me. In reality, they were both just different parts of me. Like
yeah.
they were both they were both me, just
Mhm,
different parts of me. And I would say at the time, when I was experiencing it at the time, I did view the restriction in the same way, the more similar to you, as in like I viewed that as the part that I wanted. Like that was I had a more of a positive feeling towards that part. And I think that comes into like diet culture essentially and what is more praised within our society. And that the restriction was representing like this good girl. And I
mhm,
think we've spoken about that before. Whereas the binging, I didn't like it at the time, very much like you, like because I felt like the binging was coming in and was sabotaging that. But now, the reason I say I can see the binging as more the real part of me is the more in hindsight, when I look back at it, I can see the binging was like, for me anyway, it felt more like the binging was the part of me that was really fighting to like get its voice
mhm.
heard, to get its needs heard, was fighting for this like this messy version of itself to be allowed, you know, and to not live within that good girl like confinement. And so that's why I see it more as me, but in reality, they were both me.
Yeah, I totally hear you, and I would say the same in that the binging that I really had so much shame around and just couldn't understand why that was a behavior for me, it really was my ally. It really
Mhm,
was the only part of me that was trying to speak up, because really the restriction was suppression, right? The
mhm.
restriction was wanting me to obey and do what I should do and just stay quiet and never have a problem and do everything perfectly. That's not me. That's not anyone really. I mean, and yet the binge
But
part
what
of
is
me.
perfect? It doesn't
Exactly.
exist, right?
I think the binge part was potentially my most authentic part, really,
Mhm,
because my binge
mhm,
part was the part of me that was like, "You can't talk to me like that. You're not going to treat me
mhm.
like that. I'm not going to stay
Yeah,
quiet
that's
because of you. Like, you will not do
yeah.
this to me." Although absolutely did not feel it at the time. I think understanding that was my
Mhm,
first practice of gaining some compassion and understanding of maybe this isn't actually a part of me that I need to be trying to remove. Maybe it's the part I need to listen to, because it might actually be the most authentic part of me, you
yeah,
know?
yeah. And I guess so. What we both said, we've talked about how conflict was viewed growing up, and you know complexities of that, and how it linked it to binge eating. But we both said that we've worked on that, and that's not how we view conflict now, and it's not how we approach conflict now. So it'd be interesting to talk about like what's helped with that shift. And I think a big part of that is reframing how we view conflict or how we view difference. So if there is a difference of opinion, that doesn't need to be personal. Something that's a new belief that I've had to kind of adopt, that actually if someone thinks a different thing to me, that's not necessarily a personal attack on me.
Mhm,
And equally, if I have a different opinion to another person, it's not me personally attacking them. And the way to approach that is to have curiosity and like, why do I think this and feel a certain way or think something should be done this way? And perhaps maybe why do they have a different view on it?
mhm,
Because if we can try and approach both perspectives from curiosity, we're making space for both of us. Not like
mhm,
one has to be dominant and the other one gets squashed down and is wrong. Then there's no right or wrong either. It's like they're just different. Let's try and understand both. And you might try and understand both and still sit on your side of the fence, and that's fine, but at least you kind of explored it. and there's more openness there. And I think this is important because I think this is kind of what we've spoken about quite a few times with the binging and restricting is can we actually approach them both from curiosity?
Mhm.
Because the way I was viewing binging at the time was binging was wrong, whereas restriction was right. That was what I wanted to do. But through being able to open that up to a bit more curiosity of, well, what is the binging trying to say? Like, where is the binging coming from? Like, what's its angle? What's it trying to voice? And also, what is the restriction trying to voice? What's it trying to say? Then I've made room for both of them. It hasn't been like one's been squashed and one's been put up on a pedestal. They're both just being held there in kind of on an equal footing with curiosity. And it's a similar thing. Like you can approach interpersonal conflict in that way, and you can approach inner conflict in that way too. I think that's helpful. That was helpful for me.
Yeah, I think that is helpful, the way that you're talking about conflict, right? My issue with conflict is, well, the thing I struggle with is, for me, I think I have this fear of conflict being a result of me speaking up, right? I say it like that is because for me, conflict is less about disagreeing with someone, because I would say that a fault of mine is that I am too understanding. Like, I will actually shoot myself in the foot because I spend too much time trying to understand the other person's point of view to the point where I
Ah,
actually ignore my own. And I have a
yeah. So this is
my
different.
yes. So
Mhm.
I have a best friend who's exactly the same, and I'm forever saying to her, like, let's remove them from the equation. How do you feel? There's too much compassion, there's too much understanding and too much analyzing of someone to the point where you're downplaying how you even feel. I think my thing is I never want to have blinkers on. And because my thing is not feeling heard and not feeling seen, I never want someone to feel that way as a result of me and my behavior and my navigation of relationships. So to a point where I'm like, I will make sure I fully understand what you're saying. But my problem is then I don't speak up and I don't say anything. And then that festers and that boils. And then I start to feel this like, my sister says this to me all the time because she's the total opposite for me. She will speak up. She will say, "How dare you?" She full of it, right? I'm the opposite. So she says to me, she's like, "Sometimes I just really think you need to shout more." And I'm like, "You're probably not wrong. You're probably not wrong. I just feel like you just need to really let it out because I don't know how you don't raise your voice and you don't get a bit pent up." And yeah, as I say, I think she's probably not that I'm condoning shouting, but like there's an assertiveness that I'm missing that I think I could actually do with, but I'm so scared of speaking up and being loud and maybe upsetting someone, not because of anything I've said that's directed at them, but I don't know how they're going to feel as a result of how I feel. And then what does that mean for them? Are they going to leave me? Are they going to not want to talk to me again? Do you know what I mean? Oh my God,
Mm.
this is like an abandonment wound, isn't it? Lord help me.
No, do you know what's
Unpack
really?
that.
Do you know what? Right, I'm going to share my thoughts on this.
Please
Okay,
do.
because what's quite interesting
Is this
is
Counsellor Becca? Is Counsellor Becca in the room with us? I'm excited. I'll brace myself.
those are going to relate to my experience as well. But this is what I'm thinking. I have been told more in my adult life now that you're too nice. You always try and understand everyone else's perspective. Like, why don't like they're a dick? Someone's just be like they're just a dick and just accept they're a dick.
Let
And
it be.
I'm like, no, not really, because like this and this, and I'm taking into consideration how they feel, and that's quite interesting because obviously with my default or approach to conflict, especially when I was younger, was to not be like that, was to be actually really argumentative and try and make
Mhm.
sure that I was seen as right. That's really, really changed to the point now where sometimes people are like, you're too kind to other people. And then I often respond to that with like, no, I'm not. I just want to make sure that I'm considering like
Mhm.
all perspectives and, all the things that could be influencing them. which is kind of what you're speaking about here. Like you do
Yes,
that too
absolutely.
much, right? I think the difference is, and I don't know if this will land for you, the difference is I can consider all of that about another person and still go, but I might still disagree with it. So I can see that this person has done X, Y, Z because of this, this, and this. And at the same time, I'm not going to abandon myself and I still feel this way. I can understand why you did this, but I still am hurt by it and I'm still going to voice how I feel about it. And I think that's the difference because what you're saying is you give the other person all of that time to understand what's going on for them, why they might have done something and to be understanding, but you don't give it back to yourself. So your voice still becomes like the quiet version.
Yes, because I try and be understanding and make sense of how someone got from A to B or whatever. It's like I then use it to convince myself that how I felt wasn't really that big of a deal. It's fine, it doesn't matter. Or it plants seeds of doubt and then I feel too nervous to navigate it again. Then it feels easier to just stay quiet and let it be, which then always
Mhm.
backfires because I'm then using it as a way of suppressing how I feel.
Yeah.
Versus being able to hold space for both, as you're saying, like, I can understand this and I hear you and I have compassion for you that this is how you feel and blah, blah, blah. But this also upset me and you can't treat me like that. You can't talk to me
Yeah.
like that. You can't behave like that. It's holding space for both. That's why I'm still actively practicing, I think.
Mhm.
I mean, conflict and navigating these things vary depending on the person that you're going
Mhm.
through this with,
Yeah.
because Stuart's not argumentative. Even when we have arguments or disagreements, neither of us raise our voices. But that's the challenge of being in relationships, isn't it? You're all coming with your own
Mm.
baggage and your own way of navigating things. And it's figuring out
Mhm.
how to do these things in a way that's healthy.
Yeah. So what do you think has helped you with, because obviously you say you're still kind of navigating that ability to be
Mhm.
able to hold the two at the same time, like another person's perspective and yours
Mhm.
without abandoning yours, right? How you don't binge and restrict anymore. So I guess one, what is helping you navigate kind of conflict now? And two, like what's changed for you in being able to approach conflict or handle the avoidance of conflict, maybe in your case, and not turn to binging, do you think?
So, in terms of navigating conflict now, I always feel like this is just not helpful, but I understand that navigating conflict or any sort of disagreement is never going to be comfortable for me. There's
Mhm.
always going to be a part of me that's going to be like, no, let's not do this. Let's avoid it. There is that visceral discomfort for me. So I'm much more aware of that. So my expectations are much more realistic, right? In terms of how I feel in my body when I'm navigating conflict, because that can be so disorienting when you feel that I can't be in my own skin kind of feeling. And it's something that I know is there and I'm not scared of it and I'm not running away from it anymore. So I think that the practice of that, of this is how I'm going to feel, I'm not going to like it, but it's important that I do it. Um,
Like stress tolerance, I guess.
yes, exactly. Like
Mm.
exposure therapy. Not going to be
Mhm.
enjoyable.
Well,
Um,
sometimes like recovery isn't that glamorous, like the suggestions. It's like, well, yeah,
well,
actually,
it's
it's learning
not.
to sit
And
in the shit of it.
well, that's the thing. I think if I was expecting myself to be like, well, you just need to get to a point where you're okay with being in conflict, I'm never
Mm.
going to get there. It's unrealistic. I'm not going to be someone that likes that. Or I say likes that, isn't that comes naturally to me. I would also say that the way that I navigate conflict changes. And I'm saying the word conflict, it's feeling more like the way I navigate arguments or disagreements. It's probably what I would
Mhm.
say. In that I will write things out on my phone. I'll word out exactly what I want to say. Because for me, it's about speaking up, right? That's the whole thing for me. The premise for me is being able to have a voice. And so when I first started practicing speaking up and saying these things, I would do it via text message first
Mhm.
because that
Yeah.
felt like I'm giving someone else their own space to read and absorb what I'm saying and then respond. So I felt like I had a
Yeah, there's
safe buffer.
distance, isn't there?
Yeah, that felt better. And also for me, like the pause.
Mhm.
If something's bothering me and I'm especially if I notice I can feel myself like, that bubbling feeling you can get, this sort of rage is the word that comes to my head of feeling like you could just the cartoon where the steam comes out your ears, that sort of feeling.
Yeah.
I'm far better at recognizing when I'm feeling like that. And then normally I'm feeling like that as a result of not necessarily what's going on in the moment, but of other things that maybe are going on. And it's like a pressure cooker thing. So it's practicing a pause of removing myself from a situation and really like thinking, okay, what's bothering me? What's on my mind? What am I not saying? Not with the pressure of having to communicate it if I don't think it's necessary, but even just to acknowledge for myself what's going on in my head. How are we feeling? What's bothering us? L- Small or big doesn't matter. Sometimes I just need to come back to myself. What do I need to name? What do I need to validate? And then within that, what in here do I feel I need to communicate to my partner or to whoever or whatever? And what do I feel is like something that I'm okay with
Mm.
letting it be, you know?
Yeah. Because that kind of checking in with yourself,
Mm.
it sounds, it's giving space to how you feel about it.
Mhm.
Even if you choose not to outwardly express that to the other person, you haven't abandoned yourself because you've given
Mm.
yourself self the space to understand how it is you feel about it, which it sounds like that's not what happened before, because not only did you not express it outwardly, you would squash it down with the binging.
Yeah,
So you
exactly that.
weren't even acknowledging it to yourself. Yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah.
There was a second question, but I can't remember what it was.
I don't know what it was either.
Well, you can
I think you
answer.
answered it. Which
You can
don't know
answer
what it was.
about navigating conflict now. Like, what's that like for you?
Yeah. Well, I think kind of what I shared earlier about there doesn't have to be someone who's right and there
Mhm.
doesn't have to be someone that's wrong. Like holding difference of opinion or different feelings as both just as valid as each other opens up space for curiosity. I think that's been like the biggest shift for me mentally because then doesn't it's not a battle anymore. I'm not in a battle to voice my opinion and make sure that they end up leaving this conversation feeling and thinking in the exact same way as me. And equally, then that other person isn't going to fall into that dynamic of trying to do the same in return. But there's two theories that have really helped me with navigating like conflict. And the first one is they're actually quite, I see similarity in them, to be honest. But the first one is, you know, Eckhart Tolle,
Mhm.
the spiritual teacher, or Tolle or Tolle, I never, if what surname's right. But he has this concept of the pain body. Have you heard of it?
No.
So I hope I do it justice. But the idea is that every person has pain body within them, and the pain body is it's like a separate, it's like an entity within its own right, and it is the accumulation of all of like our past hurts and emotional distress and it lives within us and we everyone carries it around with them but it often lays dormant, so we carry around all of this like this emotional unrest just sitting there. However, it gets activated, it can and it will often get activated, catches off guard when it gets activated. And a way you can tell it's activated is if you have like a really big reaction to something that doesn't quite warrant
Mhm.
that response. So I think we've all had that.
Yep.
Um, and I can feel it. Like, you know, Will might say something and I can feel the pain body become activated. It's like that kind of what you said earlier, this completely unwarranted, like rage comes up. You can feel it flooding through your system, through your blood, and you're like, for whatever reason, I'm like really angry at this person. I'm really, really hurt by this. And um, Eckhart Tolle then speaks about how that's how it responds. So it lays there dormant and then it becomes activated. And when it becomes activated, it comes out by trying to create drama or trying to create conflict or arguments. And it gets into this battle. But it's kind of like it wants to do that. So when the pain body will try to seek opportunities, and I relate to this a lot in my past, that I was the opposite of you, not conflict avoidant. I would actually like create conflict. I would want to create those arguments. And this is what helped me in understanding the pain body, because the way the entity survives and grows and develops is through creating situations where drama happens or conflict happens, because it feeds off it. Because if it can create conflict with another person and get into an argument and a battle, its energy grows. So it will keep trying to
Mm.
do that. And he talks about like one of the most, basically the way that you can stop the pain body. You're never going to not have one. Like we're all going to have one
Mm.
because we're humans and we have a history, right? And we've had emotional experiences. We're always going to have one. But the way to stop it from growing and the way to stop it from being activated is just through awareness of
Mm.
recognizing it, because the pain body cannot exist in present. So if you're aware that it's there, it can't do what it needs to do. And I found that really helpful as a concept. And me and Will, like in our relationship, will also use it as a concept. So there might be like a time where Will do something and I can feel myself, can feel it get activated, and we'll start trying to have an argument with him. And maybe I will realize it or he will realize it and we'll be like, your pain body's come up. Like your pain body is ruling the show here. And even just me saying it to myself or Will saying it brings awareness on it. It can also happen, which is where it gets tricky, is because Will has a pain body. What can happen, and Eckhart Tolle talks about this, is your pain body can become activated and create drama. And then the other person's pain body can also become activated in response to it. So actually, when you're in an argument with another person, it's not you and that person arguing, it's your two pain bodies arguing with each other.
Yeah.
So it does take like this awareness of it and this understanding of like what triggers my pain body,
Yeah.
what kind of situations trigger it, like how does it feel for me when it comes up and what does it try to do. So then having that awareness allows you to catch it in the moment when it comes up. And that's been so powerful for me in kind of navigating interpersonal conflict and stopping it escalating into something really big. And then I also think that's been helpful as a knock-on effect of binging, because actually if it hasn't turned into something so big, there isn't that need to want to try and regulate myself either.
But I really like that concept.
Cool, isn't it? It's a really helpful
Yeah.
concept.
And it helps, as you say, bring that awareness
Mhm.
back to your body and back to in the moment. Yeah, I like that. I don't think I've ever heard of that.
Yeah, it's really, I think it's in his book. Well, he's got a couple of books, but his book called A New Earth is a really helpful book in particular, I think, for understanding the pain body.
Might have to try that.
Yeah.
Knowledge is
That's
power.
one. That's one. Well, he's really big on like presence and being aware of
Mm.
the now and not being in the past or the future. And like that's all we have is the now.
Mm.
So it's a lot of what his teaching is about. But he has this concept of pain body. Um, and then the other concept that has also been quite helpful, which I think is kind of similar, but it's different wording, is in like in transactional analysis, which is like an approach to psychotherapy. They talk about we all have ego state within us, like parent ego state, the adult ego state, and the child ego state.
Mhm.
And when you're in the parent state, you can have like the nurturing, caring parent ego state within you, but you can also have like the critical parent ego state, which tries to like control and tell others what to do. And then in your child state, you can have your free child, which is like very carefree, but then there can also be like the conforming child that always tries to like do what it's told as well and like basically conform. And adult state is the present. It's like you responding from the present moment, responding in quite a factual, logical, rational way.
Mm.
And I again have found this really helpful to that idea of being like, actually, when I respond to someone, am I responding from an adult state? Because the idea is to
Mm.
try and have complementary transactions with other people. So you have your state and I have my state. And if I'm talking to you from my adult and you're talking to me from your adult, we're in a complementary kind of transaction. We're both talking to each other with respect, within the present moment, with rational thought there. However, you might say something to me and I might perceive it as like quite critical. So I might see you as in your like critical parent state. And as a response, I might go into, well, you in your free child state, you can also be quite like argumentative and rebellious. So I might go, right, well, I'm going to respond from that. And I think I spent a lot of time in the past, either in that critical parent, often towards myself, or criticizing other people's perspectives, or going into this rebellious child state, which was like just there to like, I don't care what you say, I'm going to just say the opposite to be awkward kind of thing. And if you get into that kind of dynamic, then that's a conflict. It's not necessarily complementary. Does that make sense? So I find that again a really
Yeah.
helpful concept to think, how am I responding to this person in this moment? Is it from adult to adult, or is it going to create further conflict or drama? And even I could do that within myself. So you could do it with self-talk and think, how am I talking to myself now? So that kind of voice that you were talking about earlier with like, oh, you're just, your body's disgusting. You need to change this. You need to fix that. That's like your critical parent, right? Telling
Mm.
you what to do.
Mhm.
And then the response, if you were in your conformed child, you might be like, okay, yes, I'm going to restrict. I'm going to do this. Like, I'm going to follow those rules. Even recognizing that in your own self-talk is quite helpful to be like, oh, okay, I'm in these states. How could I bring it back into the adult? you know?
It sounds that similar sort of concept to parts work, right? The different
Mhm.
different parts of us. And
Yeah.
something that's always helpful for me is anything that can help create some distance,
Yeah.
right? Because when you're in the moment, you're not necessarily seeing things clearly or like with your whole brain switched on.
Mhm.
So I love concepts like that you're talking about as a way of trying to offer yourself that like distance.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I guess like it then becomes this practice, doesn't it, of starting to recognize these different parts when they show up because we don't even
Yeah.
realize that we're going into these
Mhm.
different roles.
Yeah.
I like
They're
that.
all really helpful tools to just have that self-awareness. And
Yeah,
that totally says like if you can have that awareness and be present in the moment, then actually like it loses so much power over you.
because for me, it's less about trying to erase parts of us and removing these parts. It's more about this part's going to exist, but let me practice
Mhm.
recognizing when it's there and when it's not being helpful. And it's very easy to let these things take over, isn't it? And I
Yeah.
guess it's going through life with them in a way
Yeah.
that's not detrimental.
Yeah. I think that's a big one. It's not, you don't have to necessarily get rid of these parts that you might not like. It's about having curiosity, compassion, and making space to try and understand them.
'Cause it's not
Um,
going anywhere, unfortunately. Can't get rid of it.
but yeah. So we've probably got to wrap up here, haven't we? I
Yeah, actually, we probably do.
feel like we could have talked about that one all day. I hope it's been helpful for people. Let us know what your relationship's been like with conflict and maybe
Yeah,
how that
are you
looks
a
to your
Katie or are
eating.
you a Becca? Because we're quite different.
Yes.
So I'd be interested to see where people fall.
Yeah. Or even something
Or
different.
even
There might
something
be another
completely
third
different.
version.
Yeah, please. Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks so
fine. Thanks
much.
for listening, everyone.
And we'll catch you in the next one.